When I was a child, I spent many hours on the living room floor, poring over National Geographic magazine and dreaming about growing up to become an archaeologist, making new discoveries in ancient lands. That dream did not come to pass, but my fascination remains. So when the opportunity came to travel to Egypt and have a cruise on the Nile, I naturally jumped at the chance. Our journey to Egypt was everything I hoped it would be, a fabulous mix of ancient historical sites and warm personal encounters with the people of Egypt. I came away overwhelmed by the history, so much to see and learn. The journey maintained a near-perfect balance of ancient history and Egypt today. Perhaps I will pique your interest enough to want to make the journey yourself. One of the things I like best about our stay in Cairo is the historic Palace Hotel. The historic part of the hotel was built in 1869 to serve as a guest palace for French Empress Eugenie, whose task it was to open the Suez Canal inauguration celebrations. You see glimpses of this history in the grand staircase, the marble-carved banisters, and beautiful chandeliers everywhere. The palace design was influenced by Islamic architecture. Staying in this hotel is an important part of our learning experience in Egypt. During our journey, we stay in 3 different historic hotels. Each is a part of Egyptian history, and each one has its own beauty. The palace was on the verge of ruin when Marriott International took over the property in the 1970s. They restored the original palace, brought in new furnishings, and added 2 modern guest towers. We stay in one of the guest towers. Cairo is a very vibrant city, but huge and sprawling in every direction. Along our route to visit the Giza Plateau, I notice a great number of unfinished buildings and half-demolished high-rise apartments. I ask our guide about this, and he says that getting a building permit can be very difficult unless bribes are paid. Some builders start construction without required building permits and safety inspections, and if the government finds out, the building is partially demolished. Thus parts of the city look like a war zone. These half-torn-down buildings are a blight on the landscape. But, of course, we have come to visit the Giza Plateau and see the pyramids, about an hour's ride outside of Cairo. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is the only one of the ancient 7 wonders of the world that still exists. When you first see Khufu's pyramid, you know that it will dominate the landscape, but nothing can prepare you for how it towers above the Giza Plateau. Wow, I am really here. Photographs of the pyramid are great, but there's nothing like standing at the foot of the pyramid to comprehend how big it really is. The Giza Plateau is an ancient history lover's dream. About 4,600 years ago, ancient Egyptians started burying their most important rulers here. All 3 of Giza's famed pyramids were built during Egypt's Old Kingdom, about 2500 BC, and have endured through the ages. The pyramids provided a direct path to the afterlife, where the pharaohs expected to become gods. To prepare for the next world, they erected temples to the gods and massive pyramid tombs for themselves, filled with all the things each ruler would need to guide and sustain himself in the next world. It was thought that no one could break in and disturb the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife as gods. What they did not count on was the greed, cleverness, and tenacity of the grave robbers. Building a giant monument containing your tomb turned out to be a bad idea. Sort of like planting a huge "Dig Here" sign over your tomb. Even with tunnel mazes and internal blocking stones, grave robbers managed to loot all the pyramids of Egypt. The Great Sphinx nearby the pyramids is one of the earliest known monumental sculptures in Egypt, and may be centuries older than the pyramids. In 1798, when Napoleon came to Egypt, the Sphinx was buried in sand up to its neck. Did Napoleon's army destroy the nose of the Sphinx by cannon fire? This is clearly a myth, as the nose was gone long before Napoleon and his troops arrived in Egypt. The Sphinx has been a symbol of Egypt from ancient times to the present. It has inspired the imaginations of artists, poets, adventurers, scholars, and travelers for centuries, and has also inspired endless speculation about its age, its meaning, and the secrets that it might hold. The poet Ramon Ravenswood wrote, "For 10,000 years I have gazed upon the never-ending journey of each new era, forgotten and buried, then revealed again." This morning we fly to Aswan, Egypt's southernmost city. Aswan is the opposite of bustling, crowded Cairo. Set along a peaceful stretch of the Nile, Aswan is the ancient frontier town where feluccas drift past on the Nile's blue waters. I immediately opened the doors to the large balcony off of our room at the Old Cataract Hotel to see the incredible view of this peaceful stretch of the river. What an amazing experience! I watch feluccas follow the gentle breeze as the sun goes down. I find myself thinking about the movie Death on the Nile and daydream about what it was like when Agatha Christie kept rooms here while writing her book of the same name. Well, maybe not that part. Built in 1899 to house European travelers, many famous guests have stayed here, including Winston Churchill, Lady Diana, and of course, Agatha Christie. The historic part of the hotel is very posh indeed, with Moorish arches, plush Persian carpets, soft armchairs, and hand-carved furnishings. It is one of the finest hotels in Egypt. As part of our stay here, we have a special guided tour of the Agatha Christie Suite. While gliding along the Nile in a small boat looking for water birds, we see a Nilometer carved into a half-submerged boulder. These marks on the rock were used to measure the Nile River's clarity and water level during the annual flood season that used to occur in the time of the pharaohs. Rounding a bend in the river, a fisherman approaches our boat and shows off his catch of the morning. I snap photos as he talks with our guide Hussein. After a few minutes, he leaves us with a friendly smile to continue fishing the river. We land on the opposite shore for our camel ride up a hill to an abandoned monastery. I am pretty sure I have fear of riding camel syndrome. I decide that it's time to conquer my fear. After all, it's only a 15-minute camel ride. I am assigned a camel and a camel driver, and before you know it, I find myself in the saddle. While I am having second thoughts about the camel ride, the camel lurches to her feet. I am petrified, but my camel driver calms me down in a soothing voice. Easy does it. There you go. That's not so bad. Nice camel, I repeat over and over as the driver tells me to just relax. After a while, I'm actually enjoying myself. At the end of the ride, my camel grumbles loudly as she lowers herself to the ground. I am pretty sure she was saying something like, "Can't they make up their minds? Here we go again. Up, down, up, down." I hold on for dear life until I'm safely on the ground and off the camel. We have arrived at the ruins of St. Simeon Monastery, Egypt's largest and best preserved Coptic monastery. Constructed in the 7th century, it was destroyed in 1173 by Saladin, who feared that it might serve as a refuge for Christian Nubians. Paintings within the monastery are badly damaged, but still remind us of those who once lived and worshipped here. The ground floor contained the cells where the monks slept on stone beds. It was not a comfortable life here at the monastery. There was no well for water, so the monks were kept busy hauling water up the steep hill from the Nile River. The monks had everything they needed for this austere way of life. Crops were grown next to the Nile. There was an oil press with a granite millstone decorated with 3 crosses, a flour mill, and a bakery. By the end of the 13th century, this large and impressive monastery that had housed as many as 1,000 monks had been abandoned. This proved to be a very interesting site, a good example of what early Christian monastic life was like in Egypt. Approaching the temple island of Philae by boat, you pass directly by the temple of Isis, which looks amazing from the water. 2 sets of pylons mark the entrance to the outer and inner portions of the temple. Egypt's ancient center for the cult of Isis was a place of worship throughout the Greek, Roman, and Byzantine periods, with each ruler making their own additions to the temple. Philae in Greek means the end, and defines the southernmost limit of Egyptian territory at that time. The temple complex was begun by Ptolemy II and completed by the Roman emperors. Isis, one of the first 5 gods of Egypt, is a very important figure in the ancient world. She is the enchantress who resurrected Osiris and gave birth to Horus. She is also a giver of life and a healer and protector of kings. At Philae Temple, Isis is shown as a woman, wearing the vulture headdress and a crown with horns surrounding a sun disk. The cult of Isis outlasted every other pagan belief system and spread during the Roman period into Greece and the rest of the Roman Empire. Many of the sculptures at this temple show signs of mutilation, done with the intent of wiping out the pagan belief system as Christianity took hold in Egypt. The Temple of Philae was the last stronghold of the cult of Isis. When Christianity became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, Egyptian temple cults gradually died out. The ruins of Philae Temple were first threatened by the Nile's waters in 1902, when the Low Aswan Dam was completed on the Nile. After the height of the dam was raised, the island of Philae was nearly always flooded. Relocation to a nearby island saved this temple from certain destruction after the High Aswan Dam was finished in 1971. Well, it looks like I've run out of time. Just having too much fun taking photos and posing with some very nice Egyptians. It seems that I am the very last one of our group to leave the island. It's time to move on to Abu Simbel for an overnight stay at an eco-lodge and new adventures. The eco-lodge is our most humble abode on our journey of discovery. We were pretty well spoiled by luxurious 5-star hotels by this time, but our stay here was well worth it for the sound and light show that evening, and, as we soon discovered, a special sunrise at the Temple of Abu Simbel the next morning. The temples at Abu Simbel guard the southernmost border of Egypt and Sudan, and were built as a powerful reminder by Pharaoh Ramesses II in the 13th century BC to those who might consider invading Egypt. The smaller temple is a monument to his most beloved queen, Nefertari. It is also dedicated to the ancient Egyptian goddess Hathor. One of the best-known Egyptian queens, Nefertari means beautiful companion. Ramesses constructed the temple for her, and when she died, he had inscribed on the walls of her tomb these words of love for his queen. Nefertari, my beautiful wife, for whom the sun shines. I dedicate this sacred tomb to her, her of the two lands. May she live. My love is unique. No one can rival her, for she is the most beautiful woman alive. Just by passing, she has stolen away my heart. Pharaohs usually depict themselves as larger than the statues of their queens. But Ramesses did not do this in this temple dedicated to his most beloved queen. Instead, he made 2 large statues of the queen and 4 of himself, carved on the front of the temple. She is depicted on the temple and in this picture with the horns of Hathor, the goddess of beauty, women, fertility, and so much more. 4 colossal figures of Ramesses II seated on his throne flank the entrance to the great temple. He wears a double crown of Egypt that symbolizes the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. Around his knees are small carvings of some of his wives and children. The great temple was eventually abandoned and forgotten, and lay buried under desert sands for millennia. The temple was rediscovered during the early part of the 19th century by explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt. Ramesses II was known to the Greeks as Ozymandias. Percy Bysshe Shelley, upon seeing the temple at Abu Simbel, was inspired to write the poem of the same name. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculpture well those passions read which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." We returned that evening for a spectacular sound and light show. Hussein tells us that twice a year, once in February and once in October, the sun's rays shine directly into the inner sanctum and illuminate 3 of the 4 statues within. The statues represent Ra, Ramesses, Amun, and Ptah. The statue of Ptah, a god of the underworld, should always remain in the dark. Just by luck, our visit to Abu Simbel happens to be on February 20th. Could it be true? Tomorrow, early in the morning, the sun will partially penetrate the inner sanctum. We are naturally excited. I barely sleep that night, waiting for our wake-up call. Hussein has arranged a special visit in the early morning to witness this phenomenon. At the temple, we wait in anticipation with other sleepy people during the pre-dawn light. As the sun rays illuminate the statues, we all surge forward to get a glimpse inside the temple. It is a very special moment, and one that I hope I will always remember. Those of us who brave the cold morning for this brief and spectacular viewing celebrate with a group photo and get our Egypt on before heading back for breakfast. After this morning's visit to Abu Simbel, I'm pretty sure nothing can top that experience. Then we transfer to our private yacht for a 5-night Nile River cruise. We are going to be spoiled again. I can hardly wait. Our cabin has a lovely view of the river, right from my bed. Nothing like seeing the sunrise on the Nile through the cabin window. Our chef and his crew keep busy making us wonderful meals on board the yacht. Our boat moors overnight along the river in peaceful surroundings, so relaxing on the deck is a favorite pastime. We are very pampered by our crew of 15. That is nearly 1 crew member for every passenger. Since we are going against the current, a small motorized tender 120 feet ahead of us tows the boat up the river. The distant sound of the motor is barely noticeable as our boat glides quietly along the Nile. We enjoy daily shore excursions where we learn about village life and get to know some of the local villagers that play host to our group of curious travelers. These visits are a huge part of our special journey, lasting memories that make this journey to Egypt a richer and more meaningful experience for all of us. We take a short walk on an island to work up an appetite before returning to the yacht for dinner and our first night on board. So this is how it goes. A man rides up on a donkey, and Paul, our try-anything-once kind of guy, decides to try his hand at riding an Egyptian donkey. After a rough start, Mission is accomplished. Not as flawless as the owner, but very entertaining.
Put your foot in the stirrups, Paul.
Pull on the bridle, Paul.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Cowboys ain't easy to love and they're hard to hold.
No, Don Quixote.
In Darwell village, we stopped for a tea break while watching men load fresh hay onto a truck, and then continue our walk around this interesting village. We stop in for a conversation with a farmer about raising camels, horses, goats, and sheep. Fresh hay makes for happy livestock. After another hour of cruising, we arrive at the remains of the Kom Ombu Temple on the banks of the Nile. Kom Ombu is the only dual temple dedicated to the crocodile god Sobek and the falcon-headed god Horus. Fatal crocodile attacks on the villagers were frequent when crocodiles once roamed this area. Sobek was worshipped as an evil god due to the fear that these animals instilled in the local people. The other half of the temple was dedicated to Horus, in the belief that Horus, the god of divine kingship, would protect them from Sobek. Crocodiles were mummified to honor Sobek. If you want to see crocodile mummies, this is the place to be. The museum next to the temple has more than 300. The highlight of the afternoon is a visit to watch a local craftsman making fruit boxes from palm tree trimmings. He is so practiced and experienced that it takes him only a few minutes to complete a box. Hussein tells us that making these eco-friendly boxes is a skill that may soon be lost, as plastic fruit boxes and containers from China take the place of these handmade boxes.
No, when he asks, no, don't do it. You can ask him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
E. Dome tree. Yeah.
Can't hit the stupid whacking. Not as easy as it looks.
To visit a village market is a great experience that I always look forward to when on vacation. The sights and sounds of people buying and selling flow around me like a familiar stream. Falafel or potato chips can be purchased as a ready-to-eat snack. The baker down the street is busy pulling loaves of bread out of the oven. We buy several loaves and share them. Nothing like bread straight from the oven.
Hot.
And then there's the meat market with a smiling butcher. Camel steaks, anyone? "65 kilometers north of Aswan is the ancient quarry of Gebel Sisila that provided the stones to build almost all of Egypt's great temples, including Luxor and Karnak. Chisel marks on the sandstone quarry walls remind me of those who worked here so long ago to craft the building blocks for some of Egypt's most impressive monuments. As our crew moors the boat at Bisa Island, our host comes to greet us while children of the village line up on the shore. They know that visitors to the village often bring small gifts to share with the children. I try to greet everyone I see as I follow Hussein through the village. Small agricultural villages line the Nile River for its life-giving water. This narrow ribbon of life snakes through the barren desert landscape that makes up much of Egypt. After a talk about farming practices with our host, we're invited to his house to meet the family and sit down for a lively discussion about life in Egypt before sharing a meal together. What a relaxing way to spend the day, getting to know this wonderful family. Good times indeed. Before leaving our host's home, Paul has a request for the lady of the house. Please show me how to wrap a headscarf, Egyptian style.
I'm getting a headache.
Squeeze it tighter. That's long.
I told you, sometimes they are long, sometimes they are short, but this one is long.
I want it long, yes.
Good.
I want to see what the picture looks like.
Looking good, Paul. The temple of Horus in Edfu was preserved by desert sand, which filled the temple after the pagan cult was banned. Because of this, the temple is one of the most beautiful and well-preserved Egyptian temples. Battle scenes of King Ptolemy VIII defeating his enemies for Horus decorate the huge pylons that mark the entrance to the temple. Flanking the entrance are two statues of the falcon-headed god Horus. A black granite statue of Horus, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, stands in front of the main temple. Originally, Horus was known as the sky god, whose eyes were the sun and the moon. It became said that the sun was his right eye and the moon his left, and that they traversed the sky when he, a falcon, flew across it. I am Horus the falcon, born of Isis. My flight aloft has reached the horizon. I have overpassed the gods of the sky. The eye of Horus was believed to have healing and protective power for the pharaoh in the afterlife. Inside a chapel behind the sanctuary is a replica of a solar bark that Horus was said to have used to travel across the heavens. The soot of campfires covers the temple ceiling. Travelers often found shelter here when it was partially filled with sand. We pause for a group photo before saying goodbye to this remarkable temple of Horus. In the afternoon, our crew hoists the sails and takes us for a spin around the yacht on the towboat to get a view of our boat with the sails unfurled. Back on board, I watch one of the crew members climb the mast to stow the sails, and I am thinking, you will never catch me up there. Then I see Paul eyeing the mast as a new challenge, and much to everyone's astonishment, Paul climbs the mast in his bare feet. Everyone is relieved when he's back on deck, safe and sound. Never a dull moment with Paul around. We are relaxing on our fine boat, gliding along, when this old smoker comes by. Look at all that smoke. If there are any passengers on board, I bet they wish they had a boat like ours. I'm extremely grateful for our lovely boat and crew. Our next destination is a very special visit to a Nile River village. As we come ashore, the patriarch of our host family greets us warmly on the bank of the river, and we follow him through the village to the family compound. The entire extended family is on hand for this occasion. Brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, and children all turn out for our visit. It's a treat to share tea and cake while we talk in the courtyard. Just as we're all getting pretty relaxed, the ladies of the house invite the ladies from our group inside the house for a surprise. We follow them inside to see what this invitation is all about, and we find out that our surprise is a chance to dress up. We emerge from the house to show off our new look, and then another surprise. The music and dancing begins. Wendy has been chosen to take part in a bride dance, and before you know it, she is married to the patriarch. This was my favorite family experience. Such fun spending the morning with this wonderful family. The Temple of Esna is dedicated to Kum, the god of the source of the Nile. The portion of the temple that remains dates back to the Greek and Roman period. It was one of the last temples built in Egypt. We walked down to the temple. Yes, I said down. The temple sits about 29 feet below the street level of modern-day Esna. That this part of the temple survived until today is because it remained buried in sand and debris for centuries. Even more amazing is the fact that the roof with its highly decorated and painted ceiling is still intact. Inside, 24 columns, each with varied painted floral capitals, support the roof. Much of the original colors remain on the columns and ceiling. The ceiling is decorated with the signs of the zodiac, truly a stunning example of Ptolemaic Egyptian art. More treasures may lie beneath the streets of Esna. That's a very intriguing thought. Instead of riding back to our boat, Hussein suggests a walk through Esna to experience some of the local sights. This is a great deal of fun for me. Each new turn in the road brings so many possibilities for photos. One of the more unusual sights we see on our walkabout of Esna is an ancient oil press still at work. No reason to replace it. Very eco-friendly ancient technology that does not require electricity to run, just muscle power. Hand-painted murals on the sides of houses proudly tell the story of the occupants' journey to Mecca. Every Muslim tries to make this journey at least once in their lifetimes. In a small shop, a man presses clothes with a heavy iron heated up on the stove. While pressing the iron down carefully with his bare foot, he sprays water on the fabric from his mouth to provide the moisture for steam that is necessary for a perfect press. Now that's how you get the job done when you don't have a steam iron. Our walkabout is a learning experience about everyday life in a small Egyptian town. Tonight we have our farewell dinner on the boat and pack our bags for the morning departure. I will miss our crew, the ship, and life on board as we journey overland tomorrow on our way to Luxor. Luxor is the place to go for a visit to the impressive temples of Karnak and Luxor, and, of course, the Valley of the Kings. The modern city of Luxor is on the site of the ancient capital of Egypt, known as Thebes, the capital of Egypt from the 12th dynasty through the New Kingdom. Thebes is gone, but the stone temples of Karnak and Luxor have survived. The existence of a temple at the site of Karnak may date back more than 3,700 years ago. Multiple dynasties, including 30 different pharaohs, contributed to the Temple of Karnak. Many structures built by preceding pharaohs were taken apart and the building materials reused by the many kings and queens who were busy erasing and rewriting history. Rulers from Hatshepsut to Ramesses II to King Tut made their mark on the temple complex. Archaeologists today are working to unscramble the thousands of stone blocks and determine just how many lost structures are hidden in its history. One of the most memorable spots at the Temple of Karnak is the hypostyle hall, which today looks like a large courtyard filled with columns that touched the sky. The columns originally held up a roof that has collapsed over time. Although the columns are impressive today, they were even more stunning during the centuries after they were built. The columns and the roof were once painted in vibrant colors similar to this. Obelisks topped with gold once dotted the landscape at Karnak. After the Romans conquered Egypt in 30 BC, they carted off many of them, and today more stand in Rome than in all of Egypt. One of the oldest from the ancient world, the obelisk of Queen Hatshepsut, still stands at Karnak. The temples of Karnak and Luxor are connected by the amazing Avenue of the Sphinxes, which extends more than 2 miles between the two temples. Much of this road is in terrible condition today, with only a few of the original sphinxes that lined this road remaining intact. Sphinxes were believed to bring protection to pharaohs. Construction of this road was begun during the New Kingdom and finished around 380 BC. Two seated statues of Ramesses II flank the entrance at the Temple of Luxor. The temple is very close to both the modern city of Luxor on the left and the Nile a few hundred yards to the right. For thousands of years the temple was buried beneath the streets and houses of Luxor, and eventually a mosque was built over the site. When the temple was uncovered in 1884, the mosque was kept in place and is still in use today. Luxor is not as old as Karnak, but it is in a much better state of preservation because fewer pharaohs tried to remake the temple into their own image, as was done at Karnak. Much of it still exists as it did centuries ago. The cartouche of Alexander III is carved into the walls of the Temple of Luxor. He believed in his divine birth, so as Pharaoh of Egypt he became known as the son of Zeus Ammon. Luxor's entrance was once much grander, with 2 obelisks and 6 statues guarding the entrance. 2 large courtyards with tall papyrus columns distinguish the temple, with one courtyard dedicated to Amenhotep III and another to Ramesses II. We stay until dusk and capture some of the scenes of the temple at the Blue Hour. How grand it must have been when Thebes was the capital of Egypt and these temples were in their glory. You will find no pyramids in the Valley of the Kings. The pyramids were built in the Old Kingdom, and this practice was gradually replaced in the Middle Kingdom by deep underground tombs in a remote valley that we now call the Valley of the Kings. There are 63 known royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Pharaohs entombed here ruled the country in the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties. Tombs were placed at the end of long tunnel-like passages that go deep under the valley. Pharaohs wanted a more secure way to hide their mortal remains for the afterlife. Were they successful? Not really. Remember how greedy the grave robbers are? The tomb of Ramesses IV is the closest to the entrance of the Valley of the Kings and is one of the best preserved tombs in the valley. After a short reign of about 6.5 years, Ramesses IV was buried in his unfinished tomb. Inside the tomb are large drawings depicting the Book of Caverns, which describes the journey of the sun god Ra through the 6 caverns of the underworld. Passages from the Book of the Dead contain a number of magic spells intended to assist a dead person's journey through the underworld and into the afterlife. There are 7 gates that a pharaoh must pass through on the way to the afterlife. Specific instructions are given in the Book of the Dead on how the spirit must successfully pass through these gates. To pass through the first gate, the deceased must say, "I am the Mighty One, who creates his own light. I have come to you, O Osiris, and I am purified from that which would defile you. I adore you. Lead on." I am amazed by the images and the colors on the walls of this tomb. From the moment a pharaoh takes the throne until his death, building and decorating his tomb for his journey to the afterlife is a never-ending task. Hussein decided to show us a very unusual tomb in the Valley of the Kings, the tomb of Teret and Setnach, also known as KV-14. KV-14 contains 2 complete burial chambers. This is a story of 2 pharaohs using the same tomb for burial. The tomb was originally ordered to be built for Queen Teret by her husband Seti II. She became co-regent for her 10-year-old son and ascended to the throne after his death 6 years later. She was one of the few queens to become pharaoh to rule Egypt. She then ordered modifications to the tomb to reflect her royal status. After a short reign of 2 to 3 years, she died around 1189 and was buried as a pharaoh. Setnach, who ruled after Teret, went about the business of constructing his own tomb in the Valley of the Kings as soon as he was pharaoh. But for unknown reasons, when he died in 1187 BC, his son Ramesses III buried him in the tomb of Teret. Ramesses III then took his father's original tomb as his own. Some images of Teret in the tomb have been altered to show a king rather than the queen who became pharaoh. Perhaps the plan was to erase the history of one of the few female pharaohs to rule Egypt. Passages and scenes from the Book of the Dead are inscribed on some of the chamber walls, and there are several depictions of Anubis, god of the underworld. The god Anubis was usually depicted as a jackal and sometimes as a man, but he was always in black, which is a color connected with desolation and rebirth. Anubis's main roles were embalming the body, guiding the soul, and protecting the tomb. And now we come to the most famous discovery in the Valley of the Kings, the tomb of King Tutankhamun, an obscure king who ruled in the 18th dynasty. Howard Carter almost missed finding Tutankhamun's tomb after Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer, decided to call off the search after 6 fruitless years of searching. Carter convinced him to stick it out for 1 more season, resulting in the 20th century's most famous find. In 1922, Lord Carnarvon hurried to Egypt to witness the opening of the tomb. With Carnarvon and others looking on, Carter drilled a small hole in the top corner of the doorway and placed a candle inside. As his eyes grew accustomed to the darkness beyond, he heard Carnarvon asking, "Can you see anything?" "Yes," Carter replied. "Wonderful things, wonderful things." Carter's heart raced with excitement after he found undisturbed royal seals on the king's fifth shrine of gilded wood, containing the royal sarcophagus. The pharaoh's mummy was untouched and intact. Without this historic find, Tutankhamun would have been forgotten. Instead, he has become Egypt's most famous pharaoh. The most famous pieces taken from the tomb are on display in the Cairo Museum. Now, for the first time, all of the artifacts, numbering more than 5,000, will soon be on display in the new Cairo Museum. He was descended from Pharaoh Akhenaten, who made the unpopular move of discarding the old gods and devoting Egypt to one deity, Aten, the sun god. After Akhenaten's death, the young Tutankhamun became king, and the ban on other religions was lifted. This signaled a return to the old religious traditions. His reign was short, just under a decade. At the age of about 19, he died and was hastily buried in a small, unfinished tomb. Tutankhamun's reign was struck from the record by his successors because of his connection to Akhenaten. The boy king that should have been forgotten by history was made famous by Howard Carter's discovery of his intact tomb, a strange twist of history. We have come to the final chapter in our magical Egyptian journey, when we visit the temple of Queen Hatshepsut, the woman who would be king. There have been many extraordinary woman rulers throughout history, but 1,500 years before Cleopatra drifted down the Nile, there was Hatshepsut. As a pharaoh of Egypt, Hatshepsut ruled over an era of peace and prosperity, and just may have been the first truly great woman ruler in all of recorded history. At the time of Hatshepsut's reign, Egypt was in the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom, when the country's northern and southern lands were reunified. Military conquest of a succession of pharaohs had turned Egypt into the most powerful empire the world had ever known. Pharaohs were considered the living version of the god Horus. To have a woman pharaoh was against all social and religious norms of the time. When Hatshepsut was about 12 years of age, she was married to her half-brother Thutmose II in order to strengthen the royal lineage. As queen and the royal wife of Thutmose II, Hatshepsut reigned over Egypt together with her husband for 14 years until he died. After his death, she ruled the kingdom as regent for her 7-year-old stepson, Thutmose III. When he became of age, instead of letting him rule, she took the bold step in 1473 BC of proclaiming herself pharaoh. To strengthen her claim to the title of pharaoh, Hatshepsut began blurring the gender line. She began referring to herself in writing as both he and she. She dressed in men's clothing and had herself depicted as wearing a king's royal headdress and a false beard. At the time of her death, She was the longest-serving female ruler in Egyptian history. As conspicuous as Hatshepsut was in life, in death she was the opposite. She simply disappeared. Her imposing mortuary temple stood empty. Thutmose III tried to erase any trace that she'd ever existed to ensure a smooth succession for his son. Hatshepsut languished in obscurity until the 19th century, when scholars began to read the hieroglyphics on the walls of her temple. As her story began to emerge, she was portrayed at first as an evil stepmother, wickedly stealing the throne from her stepson. Today she is recognized as the ruler she was, a strong leader, tough but fair, who led her kingdom into an era of peace and prosperity. Flying back to Cairo to catch her flight back home, the realization sinks in that this is the end of a very satisfying journey. I experienced so much from this trip to Egypt, much more than I can possibly remember. So many ancient sites to remember that I get confused thinking about some of them. Family visits that brought joyful experiences to all. Our spectacular cruise on the Nile, where we were thoroughly pampered. Yes, this is a journey worth remembering and sharing.